Good morning, everybody. I think as we have quite a program, good morning, good morning. The room is filling up too. I see already quite some people online. So I think it's a good moment to start as we have quite a program. And I know that some people dear Pascal Durand has to go earlier for a visitor group. I think we should definitely start. So we have two main items of discussion today. Is the EU-Mercosur free trade agreement, the first point we're going to discuss, and then very linked to that, the importance of biodiversity and wildlife conservation in Amazonia, Pantanal and other biomes in Brazil. So on the 28th of June 2019, more than 20 years after negotiations started, the EU and Mercosur countries reached a political agreement on an unprecedented trade agreement. So for the first time, that I must say, also the EU applied an animal welfare condition to a trade deal. EU-related standard must be applied to preferential imports of shelled eggs from Mercosur. So here I'm speaking about the shelled eggs. Also, this is a significant precedent in trade policy. The deal remains problematic because it foresees large market access for most animal-based products from Mercosur countries, such as beef, poultry, without applying any animal welfare or sustainability conditions. Following massive mobilization from civil society, the European Parliament declared in October 2020 that it would not ratify this free trade agreement as it stands. Today, our first two speakers will explain how this FTA is likely to fuel intensive animal agriculture in Brazil, and why, despite the political and legislative evolutions that have happened since October 2020, including also the recent regulation on imported deforestation, the FTA remains a bad deal for animals, people, and the planet. My colleague here on my left side, Francisco Guerreiro, will then moderate the discussion with our panelists from Brazil about the FTA and how the FTA will not only impact animal agriculture, but would also have devastating effects on biodiversity, wildlife conservation, as I said, in Amazonia and Pantanal and other biomes in South America. So during our session, we will also hear possible solutions to the systemic concerns of this free trade agreement. So this solution could include conditioning imports of all animal-based products from the EU equivalent animal welfare standards, either by negotiating this conditionality in the additional protocol or by taking the opportunity of the revision of the animal welfare legislation to include imported products in its scope. Or we have to restart also maybe another alternative by zero with this whole Mercosur agreement. So today we are going to be joined by Daniel Perez Vega, Program Officer, Trade and Animal Welfare from the Intergroup for Animals. We will have Carla Lettieri. She is Executive Director of Animal Equality Brazil. She will join online. And then we will have a group of panelists who Francisco Guerreiro will present later on. Just let me do some brief announcements before we really start. So on Tuesday this week, the own initiative report on school scheme for fruit, vegetables, milk and dairy products was adopted. Whilst I welcome the general idea of this, I want to stress, nevertheless, my disappointment that the explicit inclusion of plant-based milk was not adopted in the final text, because we think, the Animal Welfare Intergroup or Eurogroup also thinks that children should be provided with alternatives, whether that be due to allergies, intolerances, dietary or ethical reasons. I really hope the Commission takes the needs of all the children and excludes no child when drafting its proposal. First, communication. Second, the European Citizens' Initiative Stop Shark Finning, Stop the Trade, is being discussed today Today, I think it just finished in the plenary. This initiative received over 1.1 million signatures, and the European Commission has now until the 11th of July to provide its official response, and we hope that the response will include concrete legal measures to end the trade of fins in the European Union. Third point I wanted to inform you about this afternoon. There we have an oral question to prohibit chick and duckling killing in the EU, and this will be debated this afternoon in the plenary. You know, or maybe you don't, but it's estimated that 330 million day-old chicks and millions of day-old female ducklings are killed every year in the EU by the egg and foie gras industries by grinding or gassing. This is unacceptable, particularly given that there are solutions today, like the in ovo sexing technologies that exist, where it is possible to determine the sex of an embryo before it hatches. So on Thursday, the 25th of May, from 9 on, the EP Environment Committee will hold a hearing on the European Citizens' Initiative Safe Cruelty-Free Cosmetics, Commit to a Europe Without Animal Testing. So this ECI has been closely followed and promoted by this Intergroup. So a lot of news that is very positive. You hear it, what's happening in the European Parliament regarding animal welfare. A lot of news, a lot of debates, but still a lot to do. Therefore, this Safe Cruelty-Free Cosmetics Committee to Europe Without Animal Testing, there will be also the Agri and Peti, I forgot to say that, that's why I'm adding it, and Peti committees that will be associated. The hearing will be divided into 3 parts, corresponding the initiative's 3 objectives: protect and strengthening the cosmetic animal testing ban, transform EU chemical regulation, and modernize science in the European Union. And there will be 2 commissioner present. President Jourova, she's Commissioner for Justice, as you know, Consumers and Gender Balance, and also Commissioner Breton are expected to take part. Voila, it remains now to ensure that the Environment Committee drafts a resolution on this very important issue. And that's it. So we will start with the first presentation, and I give the floor, I think, first to you, Daniel, so that we speak about the Mercosur. You have the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity of being here. I think I had a presentation. I'm not sure if I can see it. Well, let me perhaps just introduce myself. So I'm Daniel, I work for Intergroup for Animals. And for those of you who don't know Intergroup for Animals, we are the European Federation of Animal Welfare Organizations with a bit more than 90 members in Europe, not only in the EU, but also with members in South America and in Brazil. Can I have the, thank you. So we've been discussing Mercosur, you rightly said, for a bit more than 20 years now. And we could sit here and discuss for another 20 years what are all the issues with this agreement. And I won't take that long, I'll just take 10 minutes, but I promise that if you stay with me during those 10 minutes, hopefully you will understand why this agreement remains problematic, why this agreement, despite all the evolutions we had on the import deforestation regulation, the proposed directive on due diligence, the election of a more progressive president in Brazil, also the war in Ukraine, why despite all of these that we're listening and we're hearing right now, the agreement remains very problematic. And perhaps a first hint to that would be that this agreement shows the big shortcoming of European trade policy. And that is that trade policy at the moment is blind to production methods. We're importing animal products or products without really looking how they were made. And that's very important. Because, and I can have the next slide, please. I'm just one out of the 500 million citizens in the EU, but like 93% of them, I think that it's very important that animal products, imported animal products, respect the same animal welfare standards as those apply in the EU. And at the moment, that's not the case. Only the rules at the time of slaughter apply to animal products. And why is this problematic? Because right now, we're reviewing the legislation on animal welfare. We had the European Citizens Initiative with 1.2 million citizens endorsing this initiative. We're going to phase out cages. We're more broadly transitioning to sustainable food systems. And yet, all of these new rules do not apply to imports. So that's, I think, one of the big shortcomings that we have. And as you were mentioning, and you can have please the next slide, with the Mercosur agreement, sorry. Okay, I'm going to slow down a bit. So the big problem here, I was saying, is that despite the fact that this is for the first time we had an animal welfare condition in a trade agreement, it only applied to shell eggs. So that means that shell eggs imported from Mercosur countries in application with preferential market access will have to comply with EU standards. But the problem is that we don't import that many shell eggs from Mercosur. What we import is beef and poultry. And for beef and poultry, we had a huge market access. We had nearly 100,000 tons of beef, for example, and there is absolutely no animal welfare or sustainability condition. So those we could, if we have applied the agreement as it stands now, we would import those products without really looking how they were made. We could have animals that were treated in a very cruel conditions, that were transported in a very cruel conditions, that contributed to pollution of water, of soil, of air, that could be raised in feedlots, and they will still be applying preferential market access. So that means that this agreement will further fuel unsustainable methods of production in Brazil. That's one of the big concerns of the agreement. You also might have heard about the SPS, the TBT issues in the chapter, because with this SPS, the sanitary and phytosanitary chapter will perhaps jeopardize the European precautionary principle. And the TBT, the technical barriers to trade, could also jeopardize our ability to have labels. So many concerns of this agreement that are over deforestation, over sustainability, that are in general, I think, in contradiction with the Green Deal and with the Farm to Fork strategy. And that's what makes me ask the question, is this agreement already obsolete? Because if you think about it, we started negotiating in the 90s. We have a mandate from the 90s. That's more than 2 decades ago, more than 2 decades away from the Green Deal, away from the Farm to Fork strategy. And if you compare this deal with new trade agreements, and can I have the next slide, please? And I want to compare it here with the trade agreements that we have with other Latin American countries, with Chile, with Mexico, but also with New Zealand. In these new agreements, we have chapters on sustainable food systems. We have provisions on animal welfare. The language could still be improved. But yet we have that. We have a commitment to fight antimicrobial resistance. Now, in the new agreements, we're going to have the TSD review. So we're going to have sanctions in case there are violations of core international conventions. And even if the TSD does not yet recognize the links between animal agriculture and sustainable development, it's a big improvement. And this would not apply to Mercosur. And we compare it also with New Zealand, which is very interesting. Because with New Zealand, we condition the liberalization to key products. So in application of the EU-New Zealand trade agreement, if it's applied, beef from New Zealand will have to be exclusively grass-fed. So we're explicitly excluding feedlots. And that's very important because this is the key product from New Zealand. Not with, like in the Mercosur case, where we had this conditionality only for shell eggs, which we don't import anyway. So something like this kind of conditionality for beef or for poultry would be very interesting in the case of Mercosur. Can I have the next one, please? So, because we have all these problems with Mercosur, because I think it's already an obsolete agreement, there are other ways, or the Commission has been trying to find some ways to solve the issues. First, we had the regulation on the imported deforestation. I must say, it's a good step in the right direction. It will indeed address some of the issues we have with deforestation, but in the case of Mercosur, it's not enough. It's not enough because the scope of products is limited. So we only have, in the case of Mercosur, will be interesting for cattle, for soy, for leather as well. But what about poultry? Poultry is fed with soy. Soy is in the scope of the regulation, yet poultry is not included. So that means that we will be importing this poultry, we will indirectly be consuming soy that nevertheless is still in the regulation. It's also problematic because the main producer of soy in the world is Brazil, and the main region is the Cerrado, and it's not in the scope of the regulation of imported deforestation. So it's good, but definitely not enough. We have the proposal on the due diligence directive, which again is a good step. But here I'm just speculating because this is still trials are yet to come. We still need to see what will be the scope of the adverse environmental impact. So I cannot say most of that. And then we have the additional protocol that we heard about it. This additional protocol that the Commission is now negotiating with Mercosur countries. We saw a leak in the press. The problem with this additional protocol is that if it doesn't change the text of the agreement, it will not change the systematic problems we have with the agreement. If the protocol is only a reiteration or reinterpretation of the sustainability provisions of the agreement, which are quite aspirational, are not enforceable, then we're not doing anything. We're just reiterating nice words and nice commitments. So the additional protocol, unless it actually changed the agreement, unless it brings a conditionality, unless it brings actual enforceable measures, it will not do the trick. So the other question, should we renegotiate the agreement? It took us 20 years to get here. Some people would say yes, some would say no. Quite difficult to say. So maybe there's another solution, and this is my next slide, and that would be to apply autonomous measures. EU legislation on that. We have done it before. We have some restrictions, some bans on cat and dog fur regulation, for example. We also have the seal regulation that bans some seal products from the EU market. Could we have this kind of legislation in the case of Mercosur? And can I have the next one, please? And we have a big opportunity because, as you were mentioning it in the introduction, we're revising the animal welfare legislation. We're going to have new rules on farm practices, phasing out cages, ban of mutilations, breeding strategies, stunning, many, hopefully, very ambitious new rules. Could we take the opportunity to apply these rules to all imports? We will not need to negotiate with Mercosur countries because this will be EU legislation. And the Commission confirmed in a report last year, from 3rd of June last year, that it's possible in the case of animal welfare, because animal welfare is specific. It's very dear to the public morals of EU citizens. We're actually here protecting the public morals of EU citizens. It's non-discriminatory, it's in WTO compliance. So I think we have a good opportunity. We could see if with this, we could actually have a good trade agreement. And I'm going to finish with my last slide, because I'm also not going to, I just don't want to say what are the issues. I also want to propose some solutions to that. So how can we have a good agreement that will benefit animals, people, the environment, producers, consumers, everyone? First, and given the market of Brazil, we need conditional liberalization for key products, not only for shell eggs. We need conditional liberalization for beef, for poultry, either in the agreement, in the protocol, or, as I just said, extending the legislation to imports. We need an ambitious, sustainable chapter on sustainable food system, where we're going to fight antimicrobial resistance. We're going to have provisions on animal welfare cooperation. We need a TSD chapter, latest state-of-the-art TSD chapter. We had a TSD review not so long ago. We cannot have an agreement with Mercosur without a TSD chapter with enforceable measures, with the recognition of the links between animal agriculture and sustainable development. And lastly, we can also complement that with autonomous measures. So the imported deforestation regulation, with the due diligence legislation, with all this kind of legislation. So I hope that we're going to find a way forward to have an agreement that will work for everybody, for animals here in Europe, but also in Brazil. And I think that's all for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very balanced and very interesting presentation. And I will give immediately the floor to Carla Lettieri, and she's Executive Director of Animal Equality in Brazil. So hope the connection will work with Carla. Yes. Benvenuto.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm speaking in English, in Portuguese, sorry, so that all my colleagues from Portugal can understand me too. Bom dia, senhoras.
A very good morning to you all. I'm Carla Lettieri. I think I've already been introduced. I'm the Executive Director of Animal Equality Brazil. I have a presentation, and I'd like to begin by thanking you all for this invitation to talk about the impact of the EU-Mercosur Free Trade Agreement on Brazil. I'm not only representing my organization today, I also represent some 70 other organizations who also support the arguments that I will be presenting today, which were already sent in a letter to the Vice President of the European Commission. Next slide, please. So briefly, Animal Equality is an international organization working with society, governments, and companies to end cruelty to farmed animals. We do this through advocacy, corporate outreach, investigations, campaigns, and education. Next slide, please. In my presentation today, I'll talk about the context of the mobilization, the impact of the FTA as it stands, and possible remedies to be included in the additional protocol. Next slide, please. So the timeline for including conditionalities in the treaty started in April 2022. At that time, we had an online conference. We invited animal welfare and environmental protection experts to discuss the links between animal welfare and deforestation, as well as environmental degradation in Brazil and other countries. This involved experts from other Mercosur countries, and various proposals came out of this meeting and were sent in a letter to the Vice President of the EU Commission in September 2022. In January 2023, we had the opportunity to meet with members of the Cabinet to reiterate our proposals. And as negotiations were reopened to discuss the additional protocol, well, we're putting together a new letter which various partners are currently signing, and we look forward to submitting that to the European Parliament soon. Next slide, please. So, why is animal welfare important? Before we talk about the impact of it, I'd like to tell you about a study carried out in Brazil in 2021. This was carried out by the Datafolha and the Animal Forum. And it found that some 88% of Brazilians care to some extent about animal welfare standards. For example, how animals are treated. The question isn't about whether consumers care about this. It's about the major asymmetries that we have in our systems, which make it difficult for us to share concerns and improve not only animal welfare, but other aspects for our society. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the impacts themselves, the first and immediate impact is the increase in the number of animals that will be slaughtered, especially beef and other types of meat, such as poultry. And this will have impacts in terms of exports to the EU. This also will increase pressure significantly over the Mercosur biomas. And that's not only in terms of finding new areas to breed animals, but also in terms of producing more grain to feed these animals. As Daniel said, often grain is not produced in the Amazon, it's produced in the Cerrado region and other regions, and it affects other natural biomes. And there's currently a viewpoint that using feedlots might address this issue for cattle, but that would be especially worrying if we had more confinement. The problem in Brazil isn't a lack of land, it's a lack of responsibility amongst landholders who find that it's easier to just move to new land, especially because there's no penalties for moving to these protected lands. So it's easier for them to move to new land than to actually recover or restore land. Finally, if ratified, we'd probably see backsliding, decades of backsliding to stem deforestation, for example. Furthermore, it would be a lost opportunity to address a historic imbalance and help civil society to address various practices due to the great power asymmetries from sectoral representatives and organized civil society. I'm not just talking about animal welfare and protection of animals, but also the environmental movement, human rights, and other spheres. Next slide, please. Let me just tell you an example of one of these asymmetries. This is a law, 14515 of 2022, which says that all types of people in this industry, including slaughterhouses, can carry out their own checks to see animal welfare and compliance. But let's point out that there have been huge scandals, fraud over the years. And now, obviously, civil society turned out and protested and said that they didn't want this law to be adopted, but it was. Next slide, please. One other potential impact of the FTA would be the increased use of antibiotics to prevent zoonosis. Brazil is already the second leading user of veterinary antibiotics behind the US. But if the treaty were not to address the issue of animal confinement, well, it would not address whether confinement is being used to address deforestation, and we'd see an uptick in this. Next slide, please. The interpreter regrets that there is a lot of buzzing in the speaker's connection. I'd like to tell you about some remedies which are in line with what my colleague just said. The additional protocol should, inter alia, first, extend existing animal welfare conditions already suggested for shelled eggs to all animal products, especially where the trade volume is higher, and this includes beef, poultry, and other types of products, as I said earlier. Second, allow preferential access for bovine products only if coming from grass-fed farms, excluding feedlots. Third, compliance with the EU broiler welfare standards for all products derived from broilers. As Daniel said, there are tons of exports of broiler products, and we could also, fourth, have a comprehensive cooperation mechanism on animal welfare covering not only farm animals but also animals used in science and wildlife. Fifth, a chapter on the sustainable food systems to promote new forms of food production which are less dependent on animal protein, and this might also apply worldwide. And finally, financing countries to ban all forms of cages and feedlots, practices like male chick culling, and promoting the 5 domains and recognizing animal sentience. This would help Mercosur countries to help the EU to promote animal welfare and would, of course, help to protect the environment and guarantee animal welfare. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all, and I stand ready to answer any questions you have. You can see my contact information on this slide if you'd like to reach out if you have any questions or would like to contact me. Thank you again for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Carla, and sorry for the interpreters. I hear that there are some noise that is really not nice for your ears to have that. Sorry for that. I will open just the floor for 2, 3, maybe short and concrete questions, because afterwards we have a panel with 4 persons, so that we have really the time to debate on the panel. But Thomas was the first to raise his hand, please.
I'm also fine to go later when we have the panel discussion. I mean, I have two concrete questions. First to the Eurogroup for Animals. Are you teaming up with Copa Cogeca? Because, I mean, even if this is really painful to say in the moment, because what is going on the pesticide and nature restoration side, I mean, very clear contradiction to what Copa Cogeca does. But in terms of imports of lower standard products, they are, I think, mighty allies, because they have one argument, which I support, that is, well, you can't raise the production standards for European farmers while not raising them towards imported products. And there's a real fear that this will destroy production in the European Union. And at the end of the day, what do we win if we lose the production because of higher animal welfare standards and then only have imported products that do not meet these environmental and animal welfare standards? So this is a concrete question. How much are you teaming up? And to the Brazilian colleague, I mean, China is meanwhile the bigger trade partner than the European Union, and the hunger of China on especially soy and other products is huge. And China, as we know, doesn't care at all about environmental or human rights standards. Just a question on how do you see the developments within Brazil, and how much hope do you have that, or let me put the question differently, would you encourage us to do the best that we can to raise environmental and animal welfare standards in the agreement and to save it through that, to not put China in full, let's say, dependence on the Chinese market? Or would you rather suggest to us or encourage us to actually stop the agreement overall and just basically, kill it in the way it is and not work for another better agreement?
Yes, very pertinent, very good questions. I think we immediately react on that, and then I take Niels, and if there is another third question, and then we go to the round table. Please, you have the floor, Daniel, to react on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, on that question, okay, indeed, yeah. I think on that point we're completely aligned with Copa on that, because as you said, and as I said, there will be a contradiction in going forward with farm to fork, with a new animal welfare legislation, and yet not having that on trade. It's like we're having a complete lack of coherence in EU policies in general, so we should close that loophole. We're not, say, like completely like teaming up with COPA yet on this. I hope we can have, we've been discussing, obviously there's stakeholders on this, and agriculture is very important, but I think we yet have to build something more concrete on that.
Yes, and I look online to react on the second question. Just let me react on that. It's really the question, I mean, that we have the mirror clauses, or that we ask for the same standards. Yes, I think we have to do that. But the general question behind that is really what kind of society, what kind of agriculture do we want? Are we really going to succeed in ecological transition if we transport animals all over the world? I mean, there are key questions about what society do we want and what agriculture do we want at the end of the day, which in my eyes has to be local, organic, etc. But voilà, so it's much more behind that than just a free trade agreement, which definitely is not up to date anymore. I'm just speaking, seeing the connection also. Hope it's coming for Carla to react if she wants. But there she is.
Yes. Bem,
Yes, thank you. I think that this is a very sensitive question because China is a great importer of Brazilian products. But right now we're talking about production and manufacturing. If the treaty were to be ratified and would include conditionalities on animal welfare products, this would definitely have a trickle-down effect across the entire production system. And that would also impact China. The fact that China is not addressing these matters doesn't imply that the EU shouldn't. Indeed, the EU system is quite mature. And you should assess whether the Mercosur country proposals is equivalent to what you would have in the EU. And you can hope that other trading partners will also take steps to address such problems, such as deforestation and animal welfare issues. Without taking such steps, we wouldn't move in the direction of the societies we wish to see. More sustainable societies that respect all types of life. Of course, trading issues come to bear, and they need to be assessed. But I don't think that implies we should completely throw out the treaty. I think we need to look at the shortcomings and fix them before ratification. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question comes from Niels Holgersen, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you about implementation. If we have such conditions in the Mercosur trade agreement that we require or demand high animal welfare standards if we are to import food products from these countries, what is our experience when it comes to implementation? How can we, or enforcement, how can we be sure that it actually happens, that it's not just something that we're being told? I mean, we cannot go out, I suppose, and check in Brazil if everything happens in the right way. We have this discussion when it comes to animal transports, that when we transport animals from the EU to outside the EU, it's difficult for us to check what are the conditions outside the European Union. And so my question is here, if you have something to say about the credibility of such trade agreements, if we have conditions for animal welfare, how sure and what methods can we use to be certain that the products actually live up to the demands that we have? That's the first. And the second, that's perhaps to all of us, or it's perhaps because I'm not so knowledgeable about where we are in the Mercosur trade agreement and what we can do. If we want these conditions that you propose here in the agreement, what is our room for maneuver here in the Parliament? What is our power? As far as I know, the Commission negotiates this agreement, and we can vote yes or no to it. We cannot table amendments to it, as far as I know. But perhaps some of us can enlighten each other here about how we can push these things. What would be the right strategy in order to put pressure here? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just take, if that is okay, the other two questions, because I see already time running. I thought we were good in time, but I take Maria and Annika, and then I will let you react to all this question, Carla, and also Daniel. Yes, so Maria Neuscher, bitte.
Thank you very much. I have 2 points to make. One, Kopakijiga and also the German Farming Association play a double game. They say that they want to stop the Mercosur agreement, but it's not the same interests that they are representing. It's just to protect their own market, their own income. They don't care about animal welfare. reading what appears in the media, one should reject Mercosur because they say that those who say that they don't want the Green Deal speak out against Mercosur, and you really have to be careful what boat you're in and with whom you're in it. And the second question, I'd like to pick up on what Neil said. What can we do? Couldn't we establish a link to the supply chain legislation that says that the responsibility stops at the border when it comes to the environmental protection, animal welfare? No, that has to be across the board. So that has to apply to agriculture as well. And then I have a question. CBAM, that cross-border mechanism, that I'm only allowed to import things and they have to pay for CO2 at the border because CO2 is being generated elsewhere. So those products can't come in. I think that's a lot more important. I mean, sorry if I say this in the animal welfare meeting, and I'm big on animal welfare too, but I find what really gets me is that we have to try to, with the CBAM, that cross-border mechanism has to apply to agriculture. I mean, you can't have a country outside the EU going ahead with their CO2 emissions while we're cutting our back. I mean, those were my two comments. And when it comes to our partners, you have to really look closely at what they're up to, because those, when it comes to Copa-Cogeca, they don't want the Mercosur. When it came to the Japan FTA, they didn't want that either. So it's great, rather they were in favor of the Japan agreement because that was an opportunity to sell. What they don't want is competition.
Vielen Dank, Maria, für diese sehr...
Thank you very much, Maria, for those very spot-on comments, 3 comments, in fact.
Yeah, I will give immediately the floor then to Annika, please. Vous avez la
Madame la
parole.
Présidente, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to mention the mirror clauses in the Council, in the agreements, in the free trade agreements, where we'd have the same standards for both partners in an FTA. And something else is labeling when it comes to the origin of meat and the origin of processed products, because consumers aren't going to have a choice. So that's something very important. I would like to hear what you have to say about mirror clauses and the need for labeling. Otherwise, FTAs are going to be bad for animal welfare. And it's all going to be about lower prices. And when it comes to imports, whenever I suggest that they be based on the same standards as the importers, and I am always told that they'll go to other countries with their products.
A lot of questions, and we try really to reply to that shortly, because I really want to have enough time for our guest in the room and also online. Please, Daniel.
Thank you very much. I'll try to stay short on that. On the first question on the enforceability of these measures, I think we first have to look into what already exists. For example, we already have checks on SPS. So the exporters to the EU, they already have to comply with SPS measures. So all the measures of the end product. If they already will have this kind of system where the Commission checks this, we could add another layer on top of that. We also can have new systems. The imported deforestation will also kind of have some kind of traceability. So I think we have tools. We just need to put them in place, and we could look into how products were made. So that thing is one. What can the European Parliament do? Well, in 2020, the European Parliament, in a resolution of the church on its, I think it was on the common commercial policy, that said we will not ratify this agreement as it stands. That pushed the Commission to say we need to look for something else. We're going to start negotiating maybe an additional protocol. I think an additional protocol that does not change the agreement will not be good enough. So I will really call on the European Parliament to voice this, to say, like, we want something, a better agreement, a good agreement, something where we can have enforcement, where we can have sanctions, where we can have traceability, where we're going to have like some conditions. I think if you voice that, hopefully the Commission will push a bit harder and will have a better level of ambition. Then on COPA, I'd just like to comment on that. Obviously, yes, one of the reasons we're not maybe aligned yet is because we have a common agenda on trade policy, because we want the same result, but not for the same reasons. So that sometimes that makes it a bit difficult, because obviously for us it's animal welfare and also the protection of public morals. It's the way we produce, the way we consume, what kind of agriculture, what kind of products we want in the EU market. But yes, we need to look into that. And on the mirror measures, just I'd like to come back to that. Yes, of course, we need that. We need that in every trade agreement. A best way, instead, because the problem in a trade agreement, if you negotiate it in every trade agreement, you need to negotiate it with every partner. It's going to take time. It's going to take political weight. If you have it on an unilateral measure in EU legislation, I think it goes much faster. We had that in the slaughter regulation. The European Commission, in a report, I forgot that I can bring this to you later, but they say with the slaughter regulation has been one of the EU measures that has improved the most animal welfare abroad, because it helped those countries in improving the slaughter of animals abroad. So really, it worked. I think we can have it through legislation. I think would be the best way, because otherwise, indeed, we're going to continue fueling unsustainable methods of production. We're going to continue fueling cruelty abroad. And as for the other markets, I think the European market is quite an attractive market for all these trading partners. Whenever they have new standards, they actually comply with them. Most of the companies that are exporting to the EU are big companies that are able to have new standards. The trading partners are also like developed partners that are able to take new standards. We have like Brazil, Argentina, China, the US, Australia, New Zealand. These countries are the main trading partners in animal agriculture. They can completely have the possibility to adapt, and we should help them in doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Carla, do you like to react on another point? I think Daniel covered already quite of the answer, but if there is something you want to add on due diligence or CBAM, whatever, please go ahead, but very shortly. Thank you.
Ok. Bem,
Thank you. On implementation, the interpreter regrets that the buzzing is a bit too loud to interpret at this point.
Is it possible for you, please, to speak English? Because there is really a lot of noise for the interpreters. It's heavy.
yes.
Sorry
yes.
for that. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
In English, if it's possible, shortly? Yes?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I think the best way to guarantee the implementation of the conditionalities is to implement due diligence mechanisms. And I think the civil society is ready to surveil this process. And all we need is to have a good partner outside Brazil, because in Brazil, the democratic game is very, very weak, and of course we expect it to be improved in the next years, but the National Congress is still very dominated by this sector, the agricultural sector. So an example of this, and I think it's sorry. I think one of the examples I can give to you that this will help us to push the implementation of this mechanism is a bill that is being proposed in 2021 that suggests a surveillance system in all the animal protein supply chains. But this project will not be approved without a good reason to to get the interests of the agricultural sector within the National Congress. So I believe that this partnership would help us to elevate the levels of the capacity building to make this change from within.
Thank you very much. And I will quickly leave my place now for Ciro Gomes, and I let Francisco now moderate the roundtable and also present the people. So please come closer, and I will give you my place. Thank you very much to Carla and Danielle. And sorry, Carla, at the end that we didn't have the good sound for translation. Thank you very much.
So thank you for the presentations. Let's jump in. We have half an hour, so tight schedule to do this roundtable debates. I will ask the speakers to limit themselves to 6 minutes, not more, or else we won't have time to debate. So we are focusing on biodiversity and wildlife conservation in Amazonia, Pantanal, and other biomes of Brazil. Se me permitem, eu agora começarei.
And if I may, I'll now switch into Portuguese. I think that all of our panelists will also be speaking Portuguese. They're all from Brazil. So we have Ciro Gomes, the Vice President of the Partido Democrático Trabalhista, who knows quite a bit about the Amazon forest, and Brazil. We're also joined by Luciana Leite, representative of the Environmental Justice Foundation, EJF, Professor Fabio Roque from the Federal University of Mato Grosso do Sul, and Dr. Lucas Freitas, veterinarian from the GRAD group, the Group for Animal Rescue in Disasters. Animal rescue. So, we'll start with Mr. Gomes. 6 minutes, please.
I prefer to speak on my own language, mainly in sensitive matters such as this big question, the agreement Mercosur, European Union.
Now, as you all will have seen, there's a big picture which encompasses all of these matters which we're addressing today, very sensitive matters. And that big picture is that, well, in Brazil, I'm speaking on behalf of Brazilians, but I think that this also applies to other Mercosur countries. In Brazil, at least that's what I'm certain about, we don't have a national plan which defines what is and isn't legal in Brazil. So what do I mean by this? We have quite a range of legislation, often coming from Brazilian civil society and protest movements, but it's not representative of popular consensus, and that's why it can't always be implemented. For example, on the Amazon region, and this also applies to other biomes like Caatinga and Pantanal. I live in the Caatinga, where we're seeing a great amount of desertification, which is just as worrisome as deforestation in the Amazon. And nobody's talking about this, even in Brazil, but it's just as serious as what's going on in the Amazon. So in the Amazon, well, it's so big that all of Western Europe would fit into the Amazon. And even more worrisome is that even if we had the best possible agreement, we have to bear in mind that there are 40 million people living in the Amazon, and how would they comply with the agreement? Just one generation ago, they were invited by the government to move into the Amazon, and in order to be landholders, they were legally required to deforest the land. This is 3 decades ago. So 15 years ago, this was legal. And now, just in the most recent quarter, we've seen the highest levels of deforestation ever, record levels. When Bolsonaro got rid of all of the checks and balances, Lula, of course, came in with some promises, but nothing seems to have changed because the situation on the ground is what it is. And given that, I think it's very important that European public opinion, which you represent, well, Maria, I think what you said was spot on. There are a lot of different points of view, stakeholders, interests that are pushing for a new kind of protectionism. And we see this in Brazil, and that undermines the true values which should be leading our work. I know I just have a few minutes to speak, but that's my key point. So, at least for me, the EU-Mercosur agreement would be very worrisome for Mercosur in terms of industry. Let's imagine that there are new environmental checks preventing Mercosur countries from importing fossil fuel burning cars, vehicles from Europe. So we need to reach out to all of the people who are representing our new humanity, an environment, an economy based on sustainability to address these matters. So we need to pool the interests in Brazil and Mercosur countries to shift models of production. And I think that is something that we can achieve through your leadership. So we are one of the biggest worldwide producers of meat, and it's cruel the way that we're producing meat. It's even medieval. Even huge refrigeration companies which have been exporting are pushing for more and more production, and that has an impact on prices. And then we have feedlots and antibiotics. It's like 21st century slavery. It's like domestic smuggling. If you look at the company, well, from the outside, it looks like it's doing fine. They're checking all of the boxes for sustainability, but all of their partners are flagrantly violating these principles. They're illegally logging and deforesting. We need to strengthen traceability measures and perhaps have some sort of a committee, a joint committee, to make sure that these companies, which want to put in place all of these conditionalities, including sustainability and the end of animal cruelty, are receiving appropriate authorizations. And this is a major concern for us in Brazil because we have our own domestic problems. We talk about civil society, but really I'm speaking on behalf of my own political party and its views. Thank you.
We jump to Luciana Leite, that is online from EGF. If you are listening to us, Luciana.
She's in Brazil.
She's in Brazil. I'm always jumping from English to Portuguese. Luciana? Okay.
Hi, good morning. Sorry, Francisco, I was waiting to be allowed to speak and raise my voice. Well, I'll start by thanking you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, to be speaking about the Pantanal and other biomes in Brazil, which are already currently threatened by international demand for cheap commodities. So I will start by presenting myself. I'm Luciana Leite. I'm a biodiversity and climate campaigner with the Environmental Justice Foundation here in Brazil, but looking specifically at the Pantanal. The Environmental Justice Foundation is an organization that works in more than 16 countries, looking always at the interface between environmental crimes and the violation of human rights, which unfortunately we are currently seeing both happening within the Brazilian Pantanal as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to give a brief introduction for those that are not familiar with the Pantanal, we hear a lot abroad about the conservation of the Amazon, which of course is very important and dear to us. But just so our audience can understand, the Pantanal is the largest tropical wetland on Earth. We're talking about 4 million hectares, 4 million acres of a tropical wetland that expands through Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. It has amazing relevance for regional and global climate stability. It's also home to many threatened species, including the giant anteater, giant otters, the Jacinth macaw, which is the largest parrot on Earth. And it's also the land of many indigenous peoples and other traditional populations. There are estimates today that more than 1 million Brazilians depend directly on this biome for their well-being. And unfortunately, it's also 95% privately owned and mostly devoted to cattle ranching. Less than 5% of the biome is currently protected, which makes it one of the most vulnerable biomes in Brazil. Can I have the next slide, please? This is just to give you an idea about the biodiversity that we have in this biome, which is situated in between the Amazon forest, the Atlantic forest, the Cerrado as well, which therefore receives loads of influence in terms of biodiversity from all these different biomes. I'll just give you a few quick numbers. We're talking about nearly 2,000 plant species, more than 600 bird species. And I know a lot of this meeting today has been about the animal welfare of animals that are being raised, transported and slaughtered for the production of animal-based products, but here I'm gonna speak mostly about the animals and the biodiversity and this biome and what's happening to these animals even before agriculture and ranching starts entering this not very long ago wild biome. Can I have the next slide, please? So what I've been usually telling people is that different than the Amazon, the Pantanal has been going through what we call a silent death. So just to give you some numbers, in 2020 alone, we had nearly 1/3 of this wetland being burned by criminal and illegal fires. And that year alone, scientific studies now show that more than 17 million wild vertebrates were killed, burnt alive. There was an emission that year alone of more than 150 million tons of CO2. So we see an increasing debate about climate change and how to mitigate the effects of climate change, but we have to understand that climate change does not recognize boundaries. So it will not serve us well planetarily if we are trying to diminish emission in some places, but allowing in situations like this to happen in the largest tropical wetland in the planet, in which we have emissions compared to yearly emissions of some European countries due to criminal fires that were set by ranchers trying to convert native vegetation to pasture. And just to give you like some historical data, we have now data from map biomas showing that nearly 18% of native vegetation has been lost in the past decades, and we have more than tripled the area within this wetland destined to pasture. As I said, most of the Pantanal is nowadays devoted to cattle ranching, unfortunately. Can I have the next slide, please? And some also historical satellite data that has been provided by map biomas show us, and I'm going to give this graph, not going into detail, but just 2 points that are important to make is that we have increased dramatically the area devoted to pasture, as I've mentioned before, but we are also seeing a loss in surface water in this wetland. Can I have the next slide, please? So here we have, again, the images, the satellite images of how we have lost superficial water in the past decades in the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is governed by what we call the water pulse. So we have very well established the dry season and the wet season in the floodplains. But what we can actually see is that in both cases, we are seeing a dramatic reduction in the superficial water, which means that we have increased droughts, increased fires. And with the drought and fires come the pressure and the possibility for further agribusiness development. So we are now, for example, seeing within the Pantanal the first patches of soy plantation, of the floodplain, which a few years ago was unthinkable of because the soil would not stand the extremely wet conditions. But as this wetland dries out as a consequence of land use change and of climate change, we are seeing that the pressure for land use change, agri-development, and soil especially is also entering the floodplain. Now, we thought that before it was a problem for the Cerrado mainly, but now we are seeing that just like the Amazon has this deforestation arch, the Pantanal is having this ring of stranglement in which soil is starting to threaten the floodplain as well. Can I have the next slide, please?
Luciana, if you could speed up so we can still have debates.
And
Thank you very much. If you could speed up a bit,
yes,
we would appreciate. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Francisco. And one thing it's important for us to remember, and we already have proof that this agricultural conversion, this land use change is being fueled currently by EU consumption. Even without having the Mercosur trade agreement, even without increasing the trade of our cheap commodities, we are already having evidence from the ground that a lot of this destruction has been fueled by EU consumption. We have more than 15 ranchers in 2020 that were JBS, Marfrig, Minerva-Food, big companies that export meat to the EU, and many retailers within Europe that were purchasing meat from ranchers that have set illegal fires in 2020, which caused an area the size of Belgium to be burned that year alone. Can I have the next slide, please? Of course, the fires have also led to the loss of indigenous territories, again, with fires that started outside their land, increasing conflicts with indigenous communities, not only in the Pantanal, but mostly in the outskirts of the Pantanal, reminding you that the Pantanal stretches across 2 states of Brazil, one of them Mato Grosso do Sul, which has the second largest population of indigenous peoples in Brazil after the Amazon state. Can I have
Juliana,
the next slide,
sorry,
please?
you really have to wrap up or else we won't have time for the other speakers and to debate.
Perfect. It's just that we are all, as it is mentioned, finding evidence of the violation of human rights abuses within Pantanal. Can I have the next slide, please? And I think the final message is that the existing EU instruments leave the Pantanal vulnerable to spillover effects and the dislocation of deforestation, because the current regulations, especially the deforestation reg, which is a step towards the right direction, does not protect other biomes other than forested as defined by FAO, so just the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. And I think that's all that I have for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's quickly jump into the presentation of Dr. Geraldo Wilson Fernandes from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. Caro Geraldo, estiver online.
Are you online? Are you with us, sir? Geraldo?
Está a ouvir-nos?
Can you hear us?
Fernandes, can you please press the speak button? Thank you.
É o Dr. Geraldo Wilson Fernandes.
Dr. Geraldo Wilson Fernandes. If we're not able to connect, we'll move to the next speaker. All right, I'd suggest we do so. Dr. Lucas Freitas, are you online? We're running short on time. Yes. A very good morning to you.
Bastante cedo daí, portanto, se conseguir começar a apresentação.
If you could please keep your presentation to 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, for sure. The PowerPoint presentation, please. I'm presenting myself. My name is Lucas Freitas. I'm a veterinarian doctor and a volunteer at GRAD Brazil. Can we get the PowerPoint?
Yes, we are uploading. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a second, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Can we pass for the next slide, please? I'm of GRAD Brazil. We are a group of volunteers experiencing emergency response disasters involving animals. We are 60 members all over the country. We have technical qualification to act in different situations. Next slide, please. Pantanal, as my colleague Luciana already talked about, is the largest tropical wetland in the world, and it's home to a rich biodiversity. In 2020, we got the title of Biosphere Reserve from UNESCO, and it's home for 4,700 different species of plants and animals. The next slide, please. It's home to some of emblematic animals of Pantanal, which attracts a lot of tourists and a lot of interesting of the international community. And the next slide, please. Pantanal is the largest wetland in the world, but it's getting drier each year. The degradation and deforestation around Pantanal and on south of Amazon is contributing that lower quantity of water is reaching Pantanal each year. So the dry season is getting longer, and it's increased the possibility of fire. The peak of drought is in September usually, and also the peak of fire. Can the next slide, please? Pantanal is a sedimentary plain. What makes it easy to burn. So the top layer of the soil is composed by the organic matter, and this dry organic matter starts fire easily. So it usually burns spontaneously, but in the last years we are suffering a lot of pressure from the farmers. So the fires we can see in Pantanal on the last years, most of them are criminal fires for ranch farmers to put cattle on the biome. The next slide, please. We know that we lost already 17 million animals died on the fires. The ones who survive, they need to migrate to another parts of the biome. Most of them already overcrowded sites, and these animals, they start to compete for resource, and they increase the environmental imbalance. Most of the victims are the reptiles. They are too slow to run off the fire. The amphibians and the mammals are the most affected species on the fire. After the fire goes off, we still have lives being affected. When all these ashes go to the river, we also lost a lot of the river life is affected also. The next slide, please. When we got to the scene, our team is specialists of animal rescue. So we see a lot of dead animals from different species and a lot of burned animals with different kind of wounds. Those who need any veterinary treatment, they are rescued and they are taken to campaign hospitals that we set up on our base. They go to treatment as soon as they can reach freedom again. They are reintroduced to the biome. Can we get the next slide, please? We can see some pictures. We got jaguars, parrots, not just wildlife. We see buffaloes, horses, also ranch animals are affected also. The next slide, please.
Caro Dr. Lucas, se puder encerrar ou acelerar.
Could you please try to speed up a little bit so we can wrap this up? Thank you very much.
Yeah. This is a phenomenon we are seeing on the next years. We call the gray hunger. After the fire goes off, the animals, they just keep walking through a big place with only ashes. They just can't find food, they can't find water. And this is our work we are doing on the last years. We are set up in feeding points and hydration points. Can we put the next slide, please? Some of them, they need to be relocated. So we take these animals to places where they can find food, they can find water, and they can find a way of life. The next slide, please. You can see the feeding points. And the next slide, please. And hydration points. We provide them every day with food, with water. and small fishes, fruits, so that the animals can reach this resource and they can use it. The next slide, please. And from
Lucas, se puder mesmo terminar, agradecemos. Obrigado.
The last slide. And from camera monitoring, we can see that the animals, they use the resource, they need this for their lives, and we can know that we are making a huge difference on the life of these ones. Providing food, providing water, we are providing life. The next slide and the last one. These are some of the final numbers of a few of our operations on Pantanal on the last years, and we can see that we made some difference on the life of these animals. The next slide and the last one is just to tell you thank you for watching me. And this is a little part of our group, and together we are stronger. So thank you, everybody.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lucas, for all of the work that you're doing, which is so essential. We need to ensure socioeconomic and political changes in Brazil to prevent such problems. Moving now to Dr. Geraldo Wilson Fernandes. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much.
Bom dia,
I'm sorry
obrigado.
for the problems. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Can you hear me?
Sim, pouco baixo, mas sim.
Yes, this sounds a bit low, but we can hear you.
Try to speak louder. Can I have the presentation, please? So I'm substituting Professor Fábio Roque. Yeah, I have the
Estamos a
presentation.
atualizar. Estamos a atualizar a apresentação. Ok, já está, obrigado.
Okay, we have your presentation up.
Well, the European Union's Amazon anti-deforestation policies trigger potential threats to other Brazilian biomes, and that's what I'm going to address right now. Can I have the next one, please? A new European Union policy to limit imports to products that encourage deforestation or come from areas of illegal deforestation in the Amazon has a blind spot, according to us. It overlooks other key natural areas in the country that are just as important for protecting biodiversity and providing ecosystem services. Next one. The law's goal of removing incentives that lead to forest degradation is laudable, of course, given the need to halt deforestation across the globe and allow ecosystems to recover and connect the components of social biocultural layers of the planet. Next one. However, by focusing on forests alone, the law is potentially putting other ecosystems at greater risk, as well as overlooking the reliance of forests and other non-forest ecosystems on adjacent regions. We argue that to prevent unintended consequences, the European Union should immediately expand the law to include ecosystems other than forests. Next one. In response to the law, agribusinesses in forested regions will likely search for a way to continue exporting their products to the European Union. One strategy could be to remove their operations to the nearby regions, such as, non-forest ecosystems as the Cerrado and the Pantanal. Next one. In the case of Brazil, the most biodiverse country in the world, as you know, potential candidates to be further degraded are non-forest areas such as the Cerrado, Pantanal, and the Caatinga, already mentioned by Dr. Ciro Gomes. Located adjacent to the Amazon, the Cerrado spans more than 2 million square kilometers, a size comparable of Mexico, and is the most diverse savanna in the world. However, more than 46% of the land in the region has been already converted to pasture, and local water resources have been depleted. Next one. The increased land conversion would result in water and energy shortages, affecting everyone in the region, including agribusinesses, and potentially disrupt supply chains for open biome products. Next one. In the future, the European Union plans to consider all ecosystems across the globe. However, maintaining this mismatch between forest and open environments actions is risky. In addition to providing the needed protection to non-forest ecosystems, broadening the European Union law could better protect forests. That's what we think. Next one. The Amazon and non-forest ecosystem are linked. They interact through water vapor circulating in the atmosphere. Land use conversion in Brazilian open biomes alters the climatic conditions in different parts of the Amazon and adjoining countries. So we have an impact on the adjacent countries. Next one. The Cerrado's native vegetation is important for the maintenance of the Amazon systems because the vegetation's deep root systems contribute in retaining and incorporating water in the soil, which helps generating rain, especially in the dry years. And the amount of carbon stocked in the Cerrado is known insignificant. We know now that it has 5 times more carbon than previously thought. Next one. To protect all the ecosystems and the full spectrum of forest needs, the European Union should expand its policy as soon as possible, and legislation across the globe should aim to protect every type of vulnerable ecosystem, their species, rivers, and cultures. Next. An obligation is placed on companies to assess the risks and impacts of the activities, including in relation to climate change, the incidence of child labor and forced labor, and respect for the rights of indigenous peoples. Next. An efficient system to certify the information on where the product is coming from ought to be constructed and scientifically validating the further months. Otherwise, net gains in climate regulation, biodiversity, and ecosystem services can only be achieved when all species and ecosystems are equally protected, wherever they are on the planet. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, caro Gerardo.
Thank you very much, Geraldo, for being so concise and so precise. I'd also like to thank the interpreters for giving us an extra 5 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Thank you, sir. So, please do keep your questions concise. Would anybody like to take the floor at this point for questions or a comment? I do have a question. So, it's from Mr. Gomez. What we've seen... my apologies.
Please.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. You could.
No. I didn't see you. Sorry.
I was just asking for to be in the line. So maybe just a comment, because I am very happy that we had these remarkable representations in front of us, and I really think that it's really crucial to really see beyond the Amazonian forest in order to really cover also those ecosystems, Pantanal, Cerrados, whatever. They are super crucial from the perspective of biodiversity, from the perspective of carbon they store. All that is very clear. And I need to stress that when we prepare the legislation on imported deforestation, you probably would remember that we proposed to have them covered as well. Unfortunately, the negotiations simply excluded them. I don't know why. Even the mangrove forests were excluded in that regard. So really, this is not an issue that we would not be aware of the situation, but it's actually the political will that shapes the outcome of our negotiations, and it's quite an unfortunate story, I would say so, because we could have them covered already. So now we have to plan that for another mandate probably. I'm not sure whether we can really bring an additional legislation in this time that we have at our disposal. But saying that, I think that it's very crucial, and that has been stressed several times already, that we need to have these mirror clauses, like in the field. If we are asking really to raise the ambitions inside of European Union, we also have to protect ourselves, but also trying to induce the pressure also on our partners throughout the world, and the mirror clauses is probably the basic idea how this can be achieved. So everywhere where there's a space for that, let's ask for that. I know it's not easy, again. I experienced it in the IED right now when we ask for mirror clauses for the cattle standards, but even though this means protection of our farmers, the big pharma parties are against this. So I don't know what's really happening, or I know what's happening, but just to be sure that all of us understand that this is not an easy task that we are facing, but we are doing our best in order to achieve that. Thank you.
I forgot to say who you were. And I'd add one comment. A specific question, actually, from Mr. Ciro Gomes. If we had such a treaty, what would its links be to the Brazilian Constitution and other legal instruments? Because we're asking about the positive influence the EU could have in shaping environmental protection legislation. All of the clauses of the treaty, not the addenda or annexes, but the actual text of the treaty after adoption and enacted by the Brazilian leadership, would go to the National Congress, and then that would be above Brazilian legislation. Because, if I may, that would imply that if there were any clauses that contradicted the Constitution, the President wouldn't sign it. Any other questions or requests for the floor from the panelists? I see no hands up. Luciana Leit? Yes.
Okay, no.
Okay. I don't think we have a connection with her, so I'd like to thank you all for joining us and sharing this information. I'd like to thank the interpreters for the extra 5 minutes. You're welcome, sir. And we look forward to seeing us at the next intergroup meeting. Does our chair have any final remarks?
Just very shortly, thank you very much for moderating, and also for Ciro Gomes to be here with us again, and also to all the experts. I know we had a very tight program today with 7 people speaking. It was a lot. But what I take out of it today is mainly, and it was again mentioned also by Michal, but also by many others, by Maria Neuschel, etc., that we have to be coherent in what we are doing, coherent to the Green Deal, coherent to the Farm to Fork strategy, coherent to due diligence, and in order to have, or if we want this free trade agreement, we must really guarantee that they are good for the people, good for the planet, good for the animals, of course. And therefore, I personally think this Mercosur agreement that has to be then renegotiated, taking into account welfare and sustainability, animal welfare and sustainability conditions, and also the situation of the indigenous people, of course. That is the main message I take out of it. So far, as it stands, I think it's clear we cannot ratify the Mercosur. So this gave us this morning again a lot of inputs and arguments in order to be more coherent in the politics we are doing. Just a short remark on the next session. There will be held of the Animal Welfare Intergroup in June, and then we will have an exchange, and I'm looking forward for that. It's very also then coherent to have an exchange with the EU Commissioner on Agriculture. The exact date we have still to fix with the Commissioner, so we let you know as soon as we know. And I want to thank very much the interpreters. They gave us indeed 5 minutes more, and it was not easy today with the connection with Brazil. So thank you very much that you are there for us. We will be quite lost without you. So thank you very much to all of you. Bye.